Welcome back. It's time to move to chapter 6, where we will be talking about the basic processes in long-term memory. And in this section, we're going to talk about how we encode and retrieve information in long-term memory. All right, let's begin. Encoding can be broken down into two different kinds of processes: the effortful ones, the kind of processes that require attention, and then the automatic processes. Let's start with the effortful ones. So an example of an effortful process would be organization. That would be where you, as the person who's trying to remember something, group information based on the relationship among the items that you're trying to remember. So there are different ways that you can organize information. It might be based on characteristics of the material. The material sort of leads you to process or group the information in a particular way. For example, if I ask you to recall the names of the 7 dwarfs in any order, for those of you who have ever seen the movie Snow White or read the fairy tale Snow White, there were 7 dwarfs. You can try and remember the names in any order if you'd like. Go ahead and pause me and try and do that. When we do this in class, I usually just have students shout out the names. And even in a group where we have, 35 students sitting in a room and people could shout out anything, we usually get to 6 dwarfs and we get stuck. It's pretty funny. And even I, as the person who's running the demo, I can't bail us out because I'm like, man, I'm going to have to get the list out to remember because I can't remember it either, which is really funny because what'll happen is we'll see different kinds of patterns of recall that will emerge as we're trying to recall the names. Maybe we get stuck in a loop of similar patterns. So maybe, happy, sleepy, dopey, things in an E sound, maybe. Maybe once we've correctly remembered one of the dwarfs' names, it helps us to remember another one because remembering that there was a happy might remind us that there was a grumpy, something like that. Just in case your brain's ready to explode because you can't remember that 7th one, I'll just go ahead and put the list here. It's interesting because 5 out of the 7 have an E sound at the end: grumpy, sneezy, happy, dopey, and sleepy. So if you get in a kind of a train of the ones that end in the Y, you might get stuck on the 2 remaining ones and you can't remember what, Doc and Bashful, because they don't follow the normal pattern. If you get stuck on that Y, though, you might add in names that don't belong there. So you might start to come up with other names that end in an E sound, but are not the names of these dwarfs. And so you can make errors a couple of different ways, right? If you use characteristics of the material to be remembered, if you use those characteristics, it can lead you to expand out into things that don't really belong in the list of things you're trying to remember, or to leave out items that don't fit the pattern that you decided to use when using the material-induced strategies. So I list some common errors that I oftentimes see in my classes where we get so focused on 2-syllable words ending in the sound Y that we just start generating 2-syllable words ending in the Y. We might think that they all begin with an S or a D, right? Where we're like sneezy, sleepy, doc, dopey. I can't think of anything else because they all should be starting with S's or D's, right? Things that are semantic similarities, right? Where we've got happy and grumpy, right? They're clearly the opposite, but they're semantically related to each other, right? Happy and grumpy being sort of opposite of each other. And so then we might think that there should be something the opposite of dopey, like should there be a smarty? Or the opposite of bashful. Should we have, I don't know, outgoing? I don't know. We might have just sort of like this general rule that we're trying to follow, and then we try and fill in a list of 7 things that would follow the rule, right? And that could cause us to make some errors. Some ones that people will generate are things like lazy and clumsy that don't belong in the list, or droopy and grouchy that don't belong in the list. And these are really common errors that we see. So one way to organize information is based on, characteristics of the material. And a lot of people think that if material rhymes, it would be more memorable. And in a certain way it is. It's more memorable than completely unrelated words. But if you can use some kind of subjective organizational strategy, it actually produces greater memory. So what this means is that you're going to impose organization on what is in fact a list of unrelated items. So you figure out how to connect them to each other in a way that makes it meaningful for you. So typically when you're going to be imposing organization, it's going to be something based on your own personal experience in the world, which means you're tying this new information to things you already know. And that makes it a lot more meaningful for retrieval. So what I'm going to do is read a list of words out loud. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. I'm going to read 15 words out loud. You're not going to write them down as I say them because that would make it not a memory test, but just a writing test. So don't write them down as I say it. But what I'm going to ask you to do is to figure out whatever strategy would work the best for you to remember these words. Okay. So use whatever you can do inside your head to remember these words. And then at the end, I will show you the list of words and you can judge your own performance from that. So, all right, here we go. I'm trying to decide the rate that I should read the words. I think I'll do it at a 1 second interstimulus interval. So you'll hear a word and there'll be basically a second between and then you'll hear another word. So here we go. Mouse, caboose, splash, coffee, repeat, record, transpire, skirt, swirl, tulip, expire, march, number, wheel, water. Okay, you can pause me and try and write down as many words as you possibly can. All right, hopefully you wrote them down or you are just curious to see what words there were. Either way, let me reveal. All right, so these are the words that I read out loud. And if you remembered any words, it probably reveals to some degree how you subjectively impose organization on those items that made them memorable and storable for you over the seconds that it took me to complete the entire list. And who knows what organization you imposed? It could be anything, right? You could have somehow connected mouse and coffee together. Maybe you've seen a mouse at the coffee house or I don't know what. But your personal experience gets imposed onto this list of unrelated items. And we know that you engaged in subjective organization based on the order in which people tend to remember the words. That helps to reveal which words you were sort of thinking of next to each other. Either the act of retrieving one word helped you to pull the other one out of your memory, and that shows that they were related to each other in some fashion, or that you actually put them into your memory together. So subjective organization. Now, why do we organize? One reason why organized material is better remembered is, there's my Audubon clock, is economy of storage. It takes less space if you have the material organized in some fashion than if you just sort of have it randomly stuffed into your head. I mean, imagine your closet where you just sort of stuff all your belongings on the floor versus if you organize some on hangers and some on shelves and you have sort of an organizational strategy, you can get more stuff into your closet, right? So when we talk about organizing information for memory, we talk about things that we've mentioned before, like chunking. Putting two things together and into a whole now. Now it's one item rather than two individual items, or tying three things together. Now it's one. We chunk the Pledge of Allegiance. So here's a good question for you. Try and think of the second sentence in the Pledge of Allegiance. We tend to think of it as a coherent whole. So what is the second sentence of the Pledge of Allegiance? Well, that was a trick question because it's all one sentence. It is the world's worst run-on sentence with the only punctuation being commas throughout. But I had you go in there for a second, right? Because with all those pauses and breaths that we take, it may seem like, well, maybe there should be a second sentence, and how am I supposed to find it, right? Because I am treating it like one single chunk. Well, it is one chunk. And the reason why you can remember such a long string of words like you can is because you've basically chunked it into one thing. By the time, you've said it a million times throughout school and stuff, you've chunked it into one big piece of information. It's no longer a set of individual words. It's one big long thing. The benefit of this kind of structure, this kind of, imposing organization on the material, is that it really aids in retrieval from the neural network. I mean, most poems and or songs that you can generate them once you're sort of kickstarted. I always like to call it a kickstarting. I taught both of my children, and now my daughter is teaching my grandchildren to spell their names by singing it first. And I'm kind of flattered that she picked the same stupid tune that I did for my kids. I'm not even sure what the actual song is. Believe me, I didn't make up the tune, that's for sure. But it's the tune goes it's the name song in my family. Now I can't remember what the real song is, but we teach our children to spell their names to a tune for a reason, because it becomes then one unit. And if you can get started, if you can get that first note, it usually kickstarts you to go ahead and chunk the whole thing, and you can actually recite the entire thing. So chunking is a really efficient and effective way of storing information. Now, other effortful processes, the self-generation effect. The idea that if you generate the connection, if you generate the organizational strategy, if you generate additional details, you will actually remember material better, is what we're talking about with the self-generation effect. So again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read you a list of words. And your job is to judge whether each item, as you hear it, describes you or not. Okay, so you're going to hear a series of adjectives, and your job is to say yes or no for each adjective, whether it describes you. And on this list, there's going to be a total of 18 adjectives. And so what I would like you to do, if you're going to play along with me, is number 1 through 18. And for each number, as you hear the word being read, put a check mark if you feel like that adjective describes you. Leave it blank, or put an X mark if you don't think it describes you. Okay? So check mark if it describes you, blank or X mark, either way. Some people have trouble like keeping track if they don't put a mark on each line to indicate that it doesn't describe you. Okay? And then when we're done, I'll tell you what to do next, but don't write anything having to do with the words during this process. All right. So number 1, forceful. 2, quiet. 3, generous. 4, dominant. 5, tender. 6, loyal. 7, independent. 8, compassionate. 9, adaptable. 10, courageous. 11, cheerful. 12, secretive. 13, principled. 14, romantic. 15, responsible. 16, dynamic. 17, forgiving. 18, careful. All right, so hopefully you put check marks for the items that you thought described yourself and you left it blank, or put an X mark if you thought it didn't describe you. Okay, so now what I want you to do is hide that numbered list from yourself, because I don't want you to use it as a cue. So cover it or flip the paper over or something. And now what I want you to do is write down as many words as you can from that list in any order. So go ahead and pause me while you do that. Okay, so hopefully you're back and you have written down as many words as you could from that list. You knew that there were 18 items on the list, and I'll bet you didn't write down 18. Most people can remember something between 9 and 12, typically, on average. Here are the words that I actually read, so you can confirm which ones you did or didn't remember. So now what I want you to do is look at that list where you had written yes or no. Okay, so go back to your numbered list and you would put the check marks or you would put the X's or left the blanks. And what I want you to do is comparing this list that's on the screen to the list numbered 1 through 18, where you put either a check mark or an X. Any word that you listed as describing yourself, go ahead and write that word down. So if you had put a check mark for number 1, go ahead and next to the check mark, go ahead and write the word forceful, because you had considered forceful to be describing you. So if there's a check mark on that blank, go ahead and transfer the word over to that list. So go ahead and pause me while you do that process. All right, so hopefully you're back and you went ahead and you now have transferred over any words that were self-descriptive. So now what I want you to do is compare that list of words. So you've got the check mark and the actual word that had been associated with number 1, let's say. And I want you to look and see on your actual list of words that you remembered, that you wrote down during the memory task, look to see which of those words actually match the words that you had marked as self-descriptive. So go ahead and compare your recalled list to the list of words that you had thought were describing yourself. Typically what we find is that when a person considers the material to be self-descriptive, they remember those items better than the items that are not self-descriptive, the ones that they had put X's or left blank. So see if that's true for you, that you remembered more on your list of memoried words. Were there more of them that had been self-descriptive than words that had not been self-descriptive, ones that you hadn't transferred over to that list during like our third step of this very complicated design? Typically, if it relates to you and you generate something that has to do with it, you remember that material better. Self-descriptive items are usually better remembered than items that don't describe ourselves. In the last chapter, when we were talking about concepts, I offhandedly mentioned that our self concept is our most elaborate concept that we hold in our memories. So we have a lot of elaboration contained in that self-concept. So when we see that something relates to this very well-developed concept, it actually has more material to get tagged onto and related to, and so it makes it more memorable. So that's why on average, our list of recalled items will contain more things that were self-descriptive than things that were not self-descriptive. It's possible that the reason why we remember these things better is because of, elaboration. Right? Once you have connected this adjective to your self-concept, it gets that adjective now has all the benefits of the things that go along with your very elaborate self-concept. So it could be due to elaboration. It also could be that your self-concept is so well organized that it's benefiting from that organizational principle, being tagged on to things that are really well organized in your memory. The research isn't super clear on which of these is the better argument or the better description, but it's probably due to one of these two things. All right, that was a pretty complicated little design. So we'll take a break now and come back and we'll talk about some other generation effects in our next segment.